arrives home unexpectedly, only to walk into a scene he never imagined. His wife and his own mother tangled in a shocking act that shatters everything he thought he knew. In that instant, his world collapses, and what he witnesses will change their family forever. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Mary Collins's kitchen, casting delicate shadows across the worn wooden table where two plates sat waiting. She had set them every Saturday for 3 years now, though only one would hold food. The second plate remained empty, polished clean, a silent invitation to a son who no longer came home. Mary's fingers traced the rim of her favorite coffee cup, a chipped ceramic piece with faded roses that Daniel had given her for Mother's Day when he was 12. The small crack along its handle had grown over the years, but she refused to replace it. Some things, she believed, became more precious with their imperfections. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and vanilla, remnants of the apple pie cooling on the windowsill. She had baked it from memory, using her mother's recipe, the same one she had taught Daniel before he left for Chicago. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar motions of breakfast preparation, cracking eggs with practiced precision, the sound echoing in the quiet house. Outside, Riverton was waking up. Mrs. Henderson from next door was already tending to her roses, and the distant rumble of delivery trucks announced another ordinary day in their small town. Mary watched through the window as life continued its predictable rhythm, finding comfort in the sameness that others might call monotony. She reached for the small wooden box on the counter, its surface smooth from years of handling. Inside lay dozens of letters, each one carefully written but never sent. The top envelope bore last week's date, filled with news Daniel would never read, about the church fundraiser, old Mr. Patterson's recovery from pneumonia, the new family that moved into the house on Maple Street. Small-town stories that felt too insignificant to share with someone who now moved in circles she could barely imagine. The silence stretched, broken only by the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Mary had grown accustomed to the quiet, but sometimes it pressed against her chest like a physical weight. She filled it with routine, with purpose, with the careful maintenance of hope. Her reflection caught in the chrome surface of the toaster, gray hair pinned back, lines mapping years of worry and joy, eyes that still held the spark Daniel used to tease her about. "Mom, you've got that look," he would say, "like you're planning something." But planning required a future, and Mary had learned to live in smaller increments, day by day, meal by meal, letter by letter. The telephone remained stubbornly silent on its hook. She had memorized Daniel's number, could dial it in her sleep, but the calls had dwindled to holidays, then birthdays, then nothing at all. Vanessa's voice always came through the line like a polite barrier, explaining that Daniel was in meetings, traveling, busy with important things that didn't include his mother. Mary poured coffee into both cups anyway, watching steam rise and dissipate. The ritual mattered more than logic. Hope, she had learned, required practice, like faith, like love. It demanded daily renewal, even when, especially when, it seemed foolish to anyone watching from the outside. 300 miles away, Daniel Collins adjusted his silk tie in the reflection of his corner office window. The Chicago skyline stretched before him, a testament to ambition realized, yet the view felt increasingly hollow. His investment firm occupied 2 floors of the prestigious building, and his name gleamed in gold letters on the door, but success had acquired the taste of ash. The leather chair behind his mahogany desk still smelled new, though he'd owned it for 2 years. Everything in his life felt new, temporary, as if he were playing a role that didn't quite fit. His phone buzzed with notifications, market updates, client meetings, dinner reservations at restaurants where the wine cost more than his mother's monthly grocery budget. Vanessa's voice carried from the adjoining office, sharp and efficient as she coordinated their evening plans. "The Hartmans expect us at 8. Remember, he's considering the Henderson account." Her words were precise, calculated, each conversation a chess move in their social ascent. Daniel's fingers found the small aluminum container on his bookshelf, hidden behind a row of financial journals. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a simple wooden spoon, the one his mother had used to teach him how to stir pancake batter when he was 7. He had taken it when he left for college, intending to return it, but somehow it had followed him through apartments, relationships, and now into this glass tower where it felt like an artifact from another life. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Collins, Mrs. Collins is here to see you," his secretary announced. Vanessa entered without waiting for permission, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a metronome. She was beautiful in the way magazines defined beauty. Sharp angles, perfect posture, everything in its designated place. Her eyes swept the office with proprietary satisfaction. "The Morrison contract came through," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "That's $3 million this quarter." "Good," Daniel replied, though the word felt automatic. "You don't sound thrilled." Vanessa's voice carried a hint of irritation. "This is what we've worked for." "I know." He closed the aluminum container, the soft click echoing in the silence. "It's just what?" She leaned forward, her expression sharpening. "You've been distracted lately. Distant." Daniel looked past her, through the window where the sun was setting over the lake. Somewhere in that direction, beyond the highways and suburbs, his mother was probably washing dishes alone, the second plate returned to the cabinet unused. "When was the last time we went home?" he asked quietly. "Home?" Vanessa's laugh held no warmth. "This is home, Daniel. This office, our penthouse, our life. That little town is your past." The wooden spoon seemed to grow heavier in his hands. "She's not my past. She's holding you back." Vanessa's voice hardened. "Every time you mention Riverton, you get this look like you want to go backward instead of forward." Daniel's jaw tightened. "She raised me alone, sacrificed everything. And look how well that investment paid off." Vanessa gestured toward the opulent office. "You've exceeded every expectation. But success requires choices, Daniel. You can't climb mountains while carrying dead weight." The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and poisonous. Daniel felt something shift inside his chest, a hairline crack in the foundation of what he'd thought was love. The decision came to Mary on a Tuesday morning, sudden and certain as summer rain. She stood in her kitchen, holding the wooden box of unsent letters, when the weight of silence became unbearable. The chipped coffee cup sat empty beside her, and for the first time in months, she hadn't set the second plate. "Enough," she whispered to the empty room. By afternoon, she had withdrawn her modest savings, money carefully hoarded from her part-time work at the church thrift store. The bus ticket to Chicago cost more than she spent on groceries in 2 weeks, but some expenses couldn't be measured in dollars. She packed her smallest suitcase with trembling hands, including her best dress, the one she wore to Christmas service. The night before leaving, Mary stood in her kitchen one last time, preparing Daniel's favorite meal. Beef stew with carrots and potatoes, seasoned with herbs from her garden, the same recipe she had made for his birthdays, his graduations, his broken heart after Sarah Patterson moved away in high school. Her hands worked with practiced devotion, stirring clockwise just as her mother had taught her, adding love with each turn of the wooden spoon. She spooned the stew into her good aluminum pot, the one with the tight-fitting lid that would keep everything warm during the long journey. The metal was dented from years of use, a map of family meals and shared moments. As she wrapped it in dish towels, Mary imagined Daniel's face when he saw it, the surprise, the joy, the way his eyes would light up like they did when he was young. The bus station smelled of diesel and strangers' coffee. Mary clutched her purse with both hands, the aluminum pot secure in her lap, radiating warmth through the towels. Other passengers dozed or stared at their phones, but Mary watched the landscape change through the scratched window. Farmland gave way to suburbs, then to the towering glass and steel of Chicago. The city overwhelmed her senses, the noise, the smell of exhaust and ambition, the way people moved with purpose she couldn't decipher. She asked directions twice, her small-town accent marking her as foreign in this concrete jungle. The cab driver glanced at her in his rearview mirror, taking in her nervous grip on the pot, her wide eyes as they passed building after building. "First time in the city?" he asked, not unkindly. "Visiting my son?" Mary replied, her voice stronger than she felt. The apartment building rose before her like a monument to everything she didn't understand. Glass and chrome reached toward the sky, its entrance guarded by marble columns and a doorman in a uniform that looked more expensive than her entire outfit. She stood on the sidewalk, suddenly aware of how small she appeared in the building's shadow. Other residents swept past her, women in sharp suits and men with briefcases, their faces set in expressions of controlled ambition. No one looked twice at the gray-haired woman clutching an aluminum pot, but Mary felt their indifference like a physical weight. She approached the gleaming intercom system, its buttons and screens as foreign as hieroglyphics. Her finger hesitated over Daniel's name, etched in neat black letters beside apartment 2847. 28 floors above the ground, her son lived in the clouds. Mary pressed the button and waited, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for flight. The intercom crackled to life, but the voice that answered wasn't Daniel's. "Yes?" Vanessa's tone carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to filtering unwanted interruptions. Mary's throat constricted. "Hello, dear. This is Mary Collins, Daniel's mother. I've come to surprise him." A pause stretched across the static, long enough for Mary to hear her own heartbeat. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice had shifted to something harder, more controlled. "Mrs. Collins, Daniel isn't available right now. He's in important meetings all afternoon." "Oh?" Mary's fingers tightened around the aluminum pot. "I've traveled quite far. Could I perhaps wait? I brought his favorite meal. That's not really convenient today. Perhaps you could call ahead next time?" The words stung like small cuts. Mary had imagined many scenarios during the bus ride, but not this polite dismissal through a machine. "I understand you're busy, but I won't stay long. Just a quick visit." "Mrs. Collins." Vanessa's patience had visibly frayed. "Daniel has moved beyond that phase of his life. Surely you understand." The aluminum pot seemed to grow heavier in Mary's arms. Around her, the city continued its relentless rhythm. Cars honking, people rushing past with their eyes fixed on distant goals. She felt invisible, insignificant, like a ghost haunting a world that had forgotten her existence. "Please," Mary whispered into the intercom. "I just want to see my son." Minutes passed before the building's glass doors opened. Vanessa emerged like a blade cutting through silk, tall, immaculate, her expression set in lines of barely contained irritation. She wore the kind of dress that cost more than Mary's monthly pension, her jewelry catching the afternoon light like warning signals. "I thought it would be better to speak face to face," Vanessa said, her voice carrying the false sweetness of artificial sugar. Mary clutched the pot closer to her chest, feeling suddenly conscious of her worn shoes, her carefully mended sweater. "I brought beef stew. Daniel always loved my beef stew." Vanessa's eyes swept over the aluminum container with something approaching disgust. "Daniel doesn't eat that type of food anymore. His nutritionist has him on a very specific diet. But it's was his favorite. People change, Mrs. Collins. They grow beyond their limitations." Vanessa stepped closer, her presence commanding the space between them. "Daniel has worked very hard to build the life he wants. Surely a mother's love means wanting what's best for her child?" The logic felt poisoned, twisted into shapes that hurt to hold. Mary looked up at the building's towering face, imagining Daniel somewhere in that vertical maze, unaware that she stood on his doorstep carrying the taste of home. "Could you at least tell him I was here?" "Of course." Vanessa's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "I'll mention you stopped by." But something in her tone suggested the message would never reach its destination. Mary stood there for a long moment, the aluminum pot growing cold in her hands, watching Vanessa retreat into the building's gleaming lobby like a queen returning to her castle. The city swallowed her son's wife whole, leaving Mary alone on the sidewalk with her offering of love that had nowhere to go. Mary should have left. Every instinct whispered that retreat was wisdom, but love made fools of the wisest hearts. She remained on the sidewalk, the aluminum pot cooling in her arms, watching other residents flow in and out of the building like water around a stone. "I'll wait," she murmured to herself. "Just a little while." An hour passed, then 2. The afternoon sun climbed higher, and Mary's feet began to ache in her good shoes. She found a small bench across the street, positioning herself where she could see the building's entrance. Perhaps Daniel would emerge for lunch, for coffee, for any of the small errands that punctuated ordinary days. Other people noticed her, an elderly woman clutching a pot, her eyes fixed on a building she clearly didn't belong to. A security guard inside the lobby glanced through the glass doors periodically, his expression growing more suspicious with each hour that passed. When Vanessa appeared again, Mary felt a surge of desperate hope. Perhaps she had reconsidered. Perhaps she had spoken to Daniel. Perhaps, "You're still here." Vanessa's voice carried across the street, sharp enough to cut glass. Mary stood quickly, the aluminum pot nearly slipping from her grasp. "I was hoping..." Hoping what? That standing on a street corner like a vagrant would somehow change the situation? Vanessa approached with purposeful strides, her heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown. "I just want to give him the stew. It won't take but a minute." "Give it to me, then." Vanessa extended one manicured hand, her expression suggesting she was handling something distasteful. Mary hesitated. The pot had traveled 300 miles, carried love across state lines, held hours of careful preparation. Handing it to Vanessa felt like surrendering something sacred to someone incapable of understanding its value. "Could you make sure he gets it? Tell him it's made with the carrots from my garden, the ones he always..." Vanessa's patience snapped like a dry branch. She grabbed the aluminum pot with both hands, her grip hard enough to dent the soft metal. "Daniel doesn't eat peasant food anymore. He has evolved beyond this provincial nonsense." The words struck Mary like physical blows, but worse was coming. Vanessa lifted the pot above her head and brought it down against the concrete sidewalk. The lid popped free, sending beef stew cascading across the pavement in a brown river of waste, chunks of carrots and potatoes scattered like broken dreams. The aluminum pot rolled into the gutter with a hollow clang that echoed off the building's glass facade. Mary dropped to her knees instinctively, her hands reaching toward the mess as if she could somehow gather the love back together. "Stay away from this building," Vanessa hissed, turning toward the maintenance area. "Stay away from our life." The garden hose appeared in her hands like a weapon. The first blast of water struck Mary's shoulders, soaking through her good dress, the one she had saved for special occasions. The second blast caught her full in the face, washing away dignity along with carefully applied makeup. "Go back to your little town," Vanessa shouted over the sound of rushing water. "Daniel doesn't need your pathetic offerings." Mary knelt in the spreading puddle, her hair plastered to her skull, her hands still reaching for pieces of carrot that would never make it to her son's mouth. The black sedan pulled up to the curb at exactly the wrong moment, or perhaps the exactly right one. Daniel stepped out, his phone pressed to his ear, finishing a conversation about quarterly projections and market volatility. His mind was still calculating numbers when his eyes registered the scene before him. His mother knelt on the wet sidewalk, her gray hair dark with water, her good dress clinging to her thin frame. Pieces of vegetables scattered around her like evidence of some inexplicable violence. The twisted aluminum pot lay in the gutter, its familiar dents now joined by fresh wounds. The phone slipped from Daniel's hand, clattering against the pavement as he rushed forward. "Mom?" Mary looked up, her eyes wide with shock and shame. Water dripped from her chin and her hands were stained with gravy and mud. She tried to speak, but only managed a broken sound that might have been his name. "What happened? Are you hurt?" Daniel knelt beside her, his expensive suit absorbing water from the puddle without thought or care. "I brought you stew," Mary whispered, her voice barely audible above the city's noise. "Your favorite." Daniel's eyes swept the destruction around them. The scattered food, the damaged pot, the hose still dripping nearby. Understanding hit him like a physical blow. He turned toward the building's entrance where Vanessa stood watching, her expression unreadable but her posture defensive. "Vanessa." His voice carried a tone Mary had never heard before, low and dangerous. "What did you do?" "She wouldn't leave," Vanessa called back, stepping closer but maintaining distance. "I told her you were busy, but she kept insisting. She was making a scene." Daniel's hands trembled as he helped Mary to her feet. Her dress weighed heavy with water, and she leaned against him like a bird with broken wings. The smell of beef stew clung to the air, mixing with exhaust fumes and the metallic scent of city rain. "A scene?" Daniel's voice rose. "You did this to my mother because you thought she was making a scene?" "Daniel, be reasonable. She can't just appear unannounced and expect—" "She's my mother!" The words exploded from him, carrying 3 years of suppressed guilt and mounting resentment. "She traveled 300 miles to bring me food, and you humiliated her like a dog." Passers-by slowed their pace, drawn by the drama unfolding on the sidewalk. Some pulled out phones, capturing the moment when a son's carefully constructed world cracked open to reveal the rot beneath. Vanessa's composure finally slipped. "She doesn't belong here, Daniel. Can't you see that? She's from a different world, a smaller world. We've moved beyond—" "We?" Daniel's laugh held no warmth. "There is no we in this. There's just you, standing there dry and clean, and my mother, who you just treated like garbage." He bent to retrieve the aluminum pot, its familiar weight foreign in his hands now that it was empty and damaged. Mary reached for it instinctively, her fingers tracing the new dents as if trying to understand how something so cherished could be so casually destroyed. "Come on, Mom," Daniel said quietly, his arm around her shoulders. "Let's get you warm." As they walked toward his car, he didn't look back at Vanessa, but Mary did, one last glance at the woman who had reduced a mother's love to trash in the gutter. The drive back to Riverton passed in weighted silence, broken only by the hum of tires against asphalt and Mary's occasional sniffles. She sat wrapped in Daniel's jacket, staring out the passenger window as familiar landscapes rolled past. The aluminum pot rested in her lap, its dented surface catching fragments of sunlight like old scars. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, his mind replaying the scene on the sidewalk. Each time he pictured Vanessa lifting that hose, something dark and ugly twisted in his stomach. How long had she harbored such contempt? How many other cruelties had he failed to see? "You don't have to take me all the way home," Mary said finally, her voice small in the car's enclosed space. "The bus station would be fine." "Mom." Daniel's throat felt tight. "I'm taking you home." "Your business, though." "Vanessa said you had important meetings." The innocence in her voice made everything worse. Even now, soaked and humiliated, she worried about inconveniencing him. "Nothing's more important than this." When they pulled into the gravel driveway of Mary's small house, Daniel felt like he was stepping backward through time. The white picket fence needed paint, the porch steps sagged slightly, and the garden showed signs of careful but limited maintenance. It was smaller than he remembered, more fragile, like a house made of memories instead of wood and brick. Inside, the familiar smell of vanilla and old fabric wrapped around him like an embrace. But his businessman's eye began to notice things. The threadbare rug, the carefully mended curtains, the way Mary quickly closed the refrigerator door before he could glimpse its sparse contents. "Let me make you some coffee," Mary said, moving toward the kitchen with forced brightness. "I still have that good brand you brought me at Christmas." Daniel watched her reach for the chipped ceramic cup, the same one with faded roses that had sat on this counter for 15 years. She filled it with practiced care, but her hands shook slightly, betraying the afternoon's trauma. "Mom, when was the last time you saw a doctor?" "Oh, I'm fine. Strong as an ox, remember?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Dr. Patterson says I'll outlive us all." Dr. Patterson retired 3 years ago. The lie hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Mary's smile faltered, and she turned back to the coffee maker with unnecessary attention. Daniel's chest tightened as understanding dawned. The rationed groceries, the careful darning of old clothes, the way she minimized every need. How long has it been since you've really been to a doctor? Daniel, don't fuss. I raised you just fine without a lot of medical nonsense. But he was already moving through the house with new eyes, seeing what love had blinded him to before. The prescription bottles in the medicine cabinet were years old. The furnace looked ancient. The roof showed water stains that spoke of delayed repairs and stretched budgets. In the living room, he found the wooden box on the mantel, the same one she'd been holding in the kitchen that morning. When he lifted the lid, dozens of sealed envelopes spilled out, each one addressed to him in Mary's careful handwriting, dated across the past 3 years. His mother had been writing to the son who never called back, pouring her heart onto paper that would never reach its destination. Daniel's hands trembled as he opened the first letter, dated 8 months ago. Mary's careful handwriting filled the page with small-town news and quiet longing. She wrote about Mrs. Henderson's roses winning the county fair, about the new pastor at church, about how she'd saved enough to buy a turkey for Thanksgiving even though she'd eaten alone. Each letter was a window into a world he'd forgotten existed, painted in watercolors of gentle hope and carefully hidden disappointment. She never complained, never demanded, never guilt-tripped. Instead, she shared fragments of her days like offerings, as if her simple life might still hold interest for the son who lived among skyscrapers. I tried calling yesterday, read one letter from 6 months ago, but the number said it was changed. I'm sure you're just busy. I made that apple pie you always loved. Froze half of it in case you ever surprised me with a visit. Daniel's throat constricted. He had changed his number twice in the past year, each time forgetting to give Mary the new one. In his mind, she had simply stopped calling. In reality, she had been calling dead air. Daniel? Mary appeared in the doorway, her hair now dry but still bearing the afternoon's defeat. Those are just silly scribblings. Nothing important. Nothing important? He held up a letter dated 2 months ago, where she described painting the kitchen by herself, falling from a stepladder, and lying on the floor for an hour before she could get up. You were hurt and alone, and you didn't tell me. I managed fine. I always manage. Mary moved to take the letters back, but Daniel pulled them against his chest protectively. You shouldn't have to just manage. You're my mother. You have your own life now. Important things. I understand that. But understanding and acceptance weren't the same thing, and Daniel could see the difference in the careful way she moved around the truth. He opened another letter, this one describing a winter when the furnace broke and she had heated the house with the oven, sleeping in the kitchen with every blanket she owned. Why didn't you ask for help? The words came out harsher than he intended, frustrated by love and guilt in equal measure. Ask who? Mary's voice was barely a whisper. You never answered when I called. Vanessa always said you were in meetings. I thought maybe it was better to leave you be. The pieces fell together like stones into a well, each truth sinking deeper than the last. Vanessa hadn't just been rude to his mother today. She had been systematically erasing her from his life. The screening of calls, the dismissal of visits, the subtle implications that Mary was clinging to the past. Daniel set the letters aside and pulled his mother into an embrace, feeling how small she had become, how fragile. She smelled like vanilla and sadness and the faint memory of the beef stew that had ended up scattered across a Chicago sidewalk. I'm sorry, he whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry. Mary's arms came around him tentatively, as if she had forgotten she was allowed to hold on. You don't need to apologize for being successful, honey. I'm proud of you. But pride and loneliness could coexist, and Daniel finally understood that his mother's love had been large enough to contain both without complaint. Daniel didn't return to Chicago that night, or the next, or the one after that. He called his office with brief explanations that satisfied no one, least of all himself, but the urgency that had driven his life for years suddenly felt hollow compared to the weight of his mother's unspoken needs. The transformation began with small repairs. A new furnace to replace the ancient one that wheezed through winter nights. Fresh groceries that filled the refrigerator with colors Mary had forgotten, red apples, green lettuce, the bright orange of carrots that reminded them both of the scattered stew. Each improvement felt like an apology made tangible. "You don't have to do all this," Mary protested as workmen installed new windows, but her eyes followed their progress with poorly concealed delight. "I should have done it years ago," Daniel replied, measuring the kitchen for new cabinets. The aluminum pot sat on the counter, repaired but still dented, its imperfections now a badge of survival rather than shame. The idea for the community kitchen came to him while watching Mary cook. Her hands moved with the confidence of decades, turning simple ingredients into comfort, and he realized this gift, this ability to nourish others, had been wasted on solitude for too long. "What if we shared this?" he asked one evening, as Mary ladled soup into the chipped ceramic bowl he'd learned to love again. "Shared what?" "Your cooking. This feeling." Daniel gestured around the warm kitchen where he'd felt more at home in 2 weeks than in years of Chicago penthouses. "There must be other people in town who eat alone too much." Mary's eyes lit up with understanding. "Mrs. Patterson's been struggling since her husband passed. And old Mr. Chen from the hardware store, his daughter moved to California last year. Within a month, they had convinced Pastor Williams to let them use the church basement 3 evenings a week." The Home Haven Community Kitchen started small, folding tables borrowed from the church, mismatched dishes donated by neighbors, and Mary's recipes expanded to feed dozens instead of one. The first night, 7 people came. Mrs. Patterson arrived early, clutching a covered dish and wearing lipstick for the first time since her husband's funeral. Mr. Chen brought his famous sourdough starter and stories about the old days. Sarah from the diner showed up after her shift, tired but grateful for a meal she didn't have to cook herself. Mary moved through the kitchen like she was conducting an orchestra, directing volunteers in the gentle art of feeding souls along with bodies. The wooden spoon from Daniel's office found new purpose, stirring vast pots of soup, its familiar weight in her hand connecting past to present. Daniel watched from the serving line, ladling portions onto plates, marveling at how his mother's quiet grace transformed a church basement into something sacred. These weren't charity cases. They were neighbors sharing stories over homemade bread, lonely people discovering they weren't as alone as they'd thought. "You did this," Mary said during cleanup, her hands sudsy from washing the aluminum pot that had become their serving vessel for the evening's featured dish. "We did this," Daniel corrected, hanging up dish towels beside the woman who had taught him that love was a verb, not just a feeling. But even in these moments of connection, Mary harbored a secret fear, that her dependence was preventing her son from reclaiming his own future. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by express courier to Mary's front door. Daniel recognized the embossed letterhead immediately, Morrison and Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious investment firms. His former partner's signature sprawled across expensive paper, offering everything Daniel had thought he wanted. $12 million project, he read aloud to Mary as she kneaded dough for the evening's dinner rolls. National expansion, guaranteed returns, my choice of staff. Mary's hands stilled in the flour, but she kept her eyes on the counter. "That sounds wonderful, honey." The enthusiasm in her voice felt forced, painted over something more complex. Daniel studied her profile, noting the careful neutrality that had become her default whenever his old life intruded on their new one. "It would mean moving back to Chicago, full-time." "Of course it would." Mary resumed kneading with deliberate focus. "Opportunities like that don't come to small towns." The wooden spoon lay beside her, dusted with flour like snow. 3 months ago, Daniel would have seen this offer as vindication, proof that his exile to Riverton had been temporary. Now it felt like a test he wasn't sure he wanted to pass. That evening at Home Haven, the news spread quickly through the kitchen's informal network. Mrs. Patterson patted Daniel's arm while drying dishes. "Chicago's lucky to get you back." "I haven't decided anything yet," Daniel protested, but the words felt hollow. Mr. Chen, stirring a pot of his famous vegetable soup, shook his head sadly. "Course you'll go. Young man like you can't waste his talents here forever." The assumption stung because part of it rang true. Daniel had built his reputation on ambition, on the relentless pursuit of the next deal, the bigger score. The Home Haven Community Kitchen fed people, but it didn't feed portfolios. Love was nourishing, but it didn't pay for Mary's medical bills or secure her future. After the last volunteer left, Daniel and Mary cleaned in heavy silence. She moved efficiently through familiar routines, but her shoulders carried new tension. The aluminum pot gleamed under the kitchen lights, its dented surface reflecting their uncertain faces. "You should take it," Mary said suddenly, her back to him as she wiped down counters. "Mom—" "No. Listen to me." She turned, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I've watched you these months, and I see how you look sometimes. Like you're wondering what you're doing here, helping an old woman play house. That's not—" "It is, and it's natural. You're 35 years old, Daniel. You can't spend your life making up for 3 years of silence." Mary's voice cracked slightly. "I won't be the anchor that drowns your dreams." Daniel stared at her, seeing his mother's love disguised as sacrifice yet again. Even now, after everything, she was more concerned with his happiness than her own security. "What if I don't want those dreams anymore?" Mary smiled sadly, the expression that had launched 1,000 letters never sent. "Then you wouldn't be my son." The offer lay between them like a bridge back to his old life, and Daniel couldn't decide if crossing it meant salvation or surrender. 3 states away, Vanessa Reed stared at the medical report in her trembling hands. The words blurred together: abnormal cells, further testing required, aggressive treatment recommended. Not fatal, the doctor had assured her, but serious enough to shatter the carefully constructed world where appearance mattered more than substance. She sat in the parking garage of the medical building, her reflection ghost-like in the car window. For the first time in years, she wore no makeup, her face stripped of the armor she'd wielded like a weapon. The fluorescent lights revealed lines she'd hidden with concealer, exhaustion she'd masked with confidence. The memory of that afternoon haunted her, Mary kneeling in the spreading puddle, reaching for scattered vegetables with desperate hands. Vanessa had felt powerful then, righteously indignant. Now the scene played on repeat in her mind, each viewing revealing new layers of cruelty she hadn't recognized in herself. Her phone buzzed with notifications from the society pages, invitations to galas and gallery openings, in a world that suddenly felt as hollow as an empty theater. She deleted them without reading, her finger hovering over Daniel's contact information. 3 months of silence stretched between them, a gulf she'd created but no longer knew how to cross. Instead, she drove to Riverton. The small town appeared unchanged, its main street lined with shops that had probably looked the same for decades. Vanessa parked outside the hardware store and watched life unfold at a pace she'd forgotten existed. Neighbors greeting each other by name, children riding bicycles without fear, old men sharing stories on park benches. She found the Home Haven Community Kitchen by following the smell of fresh bread and the sound of laughter. Through the church basement windows, she glimpsed Daniel ladling soup into bowls, his face relaxed in ways she'd never seen during their marriage. Mary moved beside him like a conductor guiding an orchestra, her gentle authority transforming strangers into family. Vanessa sat in her car until darkness fell, watching the warmth spill from windows she couldn't bring herself to approach. When the last volunteer left, she crept closer, peering at the sign posted by the door. Home Haven Community Kitchen, where neighbors become family. Volunteers welcome. The words hit her like a physical blow. She had spent years building walls, and these people were tearing them down with soup and kindness. That night she checked into the town's only motel under a false name. The room smelled of old carpet and honest work, so different from the sterile luxury she'd grown accustomed to. She lay awake planning gestures she couldn't explain, small acts of repentance that might somehow balance the scales of what she'd destroyed. The next morning, she appeared at the local grocery store before dawn, purchasing ingredients with cash and no explanations. The delivery to Homehaven came with an unsigned note for the soup kitchen from a friend. It was a start, small as a mustard seed, but growth had to begin somewhere. Vanessa had finally learned the difference between hiding and humility, between power and purpose. The woman who had once destroyed a pot of love-infused stew was now anonymously replacing what she'd taken, one ingredient at a time. The mysterious donations became a source of gentle speculation among the Homehaven volunteers. Fresh vegetables appeared on the church steps every Tuesday morning. Industrial-sized containers of flour and sugar materialized in the storage closet. The aluminum pot that served as their signature serving vessel was joined by matching pieces, each one bearing the scratches and dents that marked honest use. The woman of the dawn, Mrs. Patterson dubbed their anonymous benefactor, having glimpsed a figure in expensive clothes cleaning the outdoor area at sunrise. Like an angel that don't want credit. Mary handled each donated item with reverence, running her fingers over perfectly fresh produce that someone had chosen with care. The wooden box that once held unsent letters now contained thank you cards addressed to our unknown friend, notes of gratitude that would never find their recipient. Vanessa read those cards through the basement windows, pressed against the glass like a child watching Christmas morning from outside. Each word of appreciation carved deeper into her conscience, revealing the woman she might have been if pride hadn't hardened her heart first. Her medical treatments progressed with grim efficiency, procedures that stripped away more than diseased cells, leaving her examining the person she'd become in the harsh light of mortality. The society friends who'd once competed for her attention proved as shallow as puddles after rain, disappearing when she could no longer host them or advance their causes. But in Riverton, she discovered a different kind of community. The grocery clerk began setting aside the best vegetables for her anonymous purchases, refusing payment with a wink. "For the church folks," he'd say, as if they shared a beautiful secret. The hardware store owner started leaving repair supplies by the community kitchen's back door. Fresh paintbrushes, sandpaper, anything that might improve the space. When Vanessa appeared one morning to find him cleaning windows, he handed her a rag without question. "Many hands make light work," he said simply, and Vanessa found herself polishing glass beside a man whose name she didn't know, but whose acceptance felt warmer than any spotlight she'd ever courted. Slowly, carefully, she expanded her efforts. The church basement's walls received fresh paint during the deepest hours of night. The folding tables were replaced with sturdy wooden ones that appeared as mysteriously as morning dew. The chipped ceramic bowls gave way to a complete set that matched nothing except the spirit of the place. Each gift was an apology she couldn't speak aloud, a prayer for forgiveness offered to people who didn't know they held the power to grant it. Vanessa learned the rhythms of the town, the way sunrise painted the empty streets gold, how the church bells marked time in something deeper than hours and minutes. She began to understand what Daniel had found here, not just his mother's love, but a connection to something larger than ambition. Purpose didn't require recognition. Redemption could be as simple as showing up day after day with clean rags and full hands. In the pre-dawn darkness, Vanessa became someone she'd never been before. Useful without being seen, valuable without being valued, present without needing presence acknowledged. The woman who had once demanded the spotlight learned to find grace in shadows. The Saturday that changed everything began like any other, with Mary arriving early to prepare for the evening's largest gathering yet. A local journalist's unexpected article had brought national attention to Homehaven, drawing visitors from neighboring counties and creating a buzz of anticipation that filled the church basement with nervous energy. Vanessa stood across the street, watching volunteers stream through the entrance. Her hands shook as she checked her reflection in the car mirror. No makeup, hair pulled back simply, wearing clothes chosen for comfort rather than impression. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, stripped of armor and artifice. She had rehearsed this moment through sleepless nights, but words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what needed saying. The aluminum pot caught sunlight through the basement windows, its dented surface a testament to survival through catastrophe. Like her, perhaps it could be repaired without erasing its scars. When Vanessa entered the basement, conversations died like waves retreating from shore. Every face turned toward her, some curious, some wary, Daniel's wide with shock. Mary stood frozen beside the serving table, a wooden spoon clutched in her flour-dusted hands. "I need to speak," Vanessa said, her voice barely audible above the sudden silence. "Please." Mrs. Patterson stepped protectively closer to Mary, but the older woman raised one gentle hand. "Let her talk." Vanessa's legs felt unsteady as she moved to the center of the room, surrounded by the community she had scorned and the evidence of love she had tried to destroy. The wooden spoon trembled in Mary's grip, and Vanessa remembered another wooden implement, the one that had stirred the stew she'd spilled onto concrete. "I'm the woman who hurt Mary Collins," she began, tears already blurring her vision. "I'm the one who destroyed her food, who humiliated her, who tried to steal her son's love by poisoning it with shame." A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Daniel moved toward her, but Vanessa held up a shaking hand. "I intercepted her calls, deleted her messages, made sure she felt forgotten and unwanted. I convinced myself I was protecting Daniel from the past, but I was really protecting myself from anything that threatened my perfect, empty life." Mary's face had gone pale, but her eyes held no anger, only a sorrow so deep it seemed to encompass the pain of every mother who had ever lost a child to pride and circumstance. "I've been leaving the donations," Vanessa continued, her voice breaking completely. "The vegetables, the supplies, the repairs. I thought if I could give back what I took, somehow the scales would balance. But nothing I do can undo the cruelty. Nothing can repair what I broke." She fell to her knees in the center of the room, just as Mary had knelt on that Chicago sidewalk months ago, reaching for scattered love in the form of spilled stew. "I'm dying," she whispered, the words she'd been afraid to speak aloud. "Not quickly, but dying nonetheless. And I can't leave this world carrying the weight of what I did to you." The silence stretched like a held breath until Mary moved, her footsteps soft against the basement floor. She knelt beside Vanessa, placing gentle hands on shoulders that shook with the force of finally released shame. "Forgiveness doesn't erase the past," Mary said quietly, her hands steady on Vanessa's shoulders. "But it can change the weight you carry forward." The words settled over the basement like benediction. Vanessa's tears fell onto the same floor where she had once imagined herself superior to everyone gathered here. Now she understood that superiority was just loneliness dressed in expensive clothes. "I don't deserve," Vanessa began, but Mary's gentle voice interrupted. "None of us deserve grace. That's what makes it grace." Daniel watched his mother extend the same mercy to Vanessa that she had always given him. Unconditional, unearned, transformative. The woman kneeling between them had hurt his family in ways that couldn't be measured, but healing required someone willing to break the cycle of pain. "The home haven needs volunteers," Mary continued, helping Vanessa to her feet. "If you're willing to learn, we're willing to teach." The community slowly resumed its rhythms around them. Mrs. Patterson returned to slicing bread, though her eyes remained watchful. Mr. Chen stirred soup with the wooden spoon that had traveled from Daniel's childhood to Chicago's corporate towers and back to its true purpose. The aluminum pot gleamed under fluorescent lights, its dents transformed from scars into character. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa became a fixture at Home Haven, not the mysterious benefactor of Dawn, but a visible member of the community who arrived early and stayed late. She learned to chop vegetables without checking her manicure, to serve soup without worrying about splashes on her clothes, to find joy in being useful rather than important. Daniel made his decision on a Thursday morning, sitting in the kitchen where his mother had once set 2 plates every Saturday. The offer from Morrison and Associates lay beside his coffee cup, next to a thank you card from a homeless veteran who'd found not just meals at Home Haven, but hope. Chicago called again, he told Mary, who was kneading dough for the evening's dinner rolls. I know, I heard the phone. I told them no. Mary's hands stilled, but she didn't look up. You sure about that? I've never been more sure of anything. Daniel reached for the wooden spoon, stirring honey into his coffee with the same implement that had taught him the patience required for love. Home isn't a place you go back to. It's something you build with people who matter. 6 months later, Home Haven had expanded into a full community center offering cooking classes, financial literacy programs, and support groups that brought healing to wounds no one talked about. The local newspaper ran a feature story about the unlikely partnership between a small-town woman, her son, and the former society wife who had found redemption in service. Mary's chipped coffee cup still sat on the kitchen counter each morning, but now it was joined by others. Daniel's mug from his corporate days, Vanessa's elegant china that she'd donated along with her pretensions. The wooden box that once held unsent letters now contained recipes shared by community members, each one a story of connection and hope. The aluminum pot had been retired to the mantel, polished but still dented, a reminder that some breaks heal stronger than the original. Love, they had learned, wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up again and again with whatever you had to offer.